There is something deeply unsettling about suddenly becoming visible to people who treated you like a ghost for 26 years. My name is Maya, and for most of my life I was the invisible child in my family. While my older brother Alexander received all the attention, praise, and love, I existed in the shadows watching from the sidelines. But now at 28, my parents cannot stop calling, visiting, and pressuring me about my future. The strangest part, they act like they have always cared. But when I discovered the real reason behind their sudden interest, I realized I had been wrong about everything my entire life. Before I tell you about my journey from the forgotten daughter to the one they cannot live without, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart and maybe change how you see family forever. Now let me take you back to when I was 12 years old and learning that love in my house came with conditions. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, our two-story house with its perfectly manicured lawn looked like the American dream from the outside. My father, David, worked as an engineer, my mother, Jennifer, as an accountant, and we lived comfortably in a neighborhood where success was measured by the trophies on your mantle and the college acceptance letters on your refrigerator. The problem was, all those trophies and letters belonged to my brother Alexander. Alexander was 3 years older than me, born in 1992, and from the moment he could walk, he was everything my parents had dreamed of. He excelled academically, maintaining a 4.0 GPA throughout high school. He was captain of the football team, student body president, and the kind of kid who made other parents say things like, "I wish my son was more like Alexander" at neighborhood barbecues. His bedroom was a shrine to achievement walls covered with certificates, medals, and photographs of him with our parents at various award ceremonies and games. My room, on the other hand, was small and simple. The walls were mostly bare, except for a few drawings I had made and a shelf of books I had collected from yard sales. I loved to write stories and create art, spending hours crafting tales about characters who felt more real to me than most people in my actual life. But when I tried to share my creative work with my parents, they would nod politely and say things like, "That is nice, dear," before immediately turning their attention back to Alexander's latest accomplishment. The difference in treatment became crystal clear during my 13th birthday. It happened to fall on the same day as Alexander's football championship game, and my parents were so focused on getting to the stadium that they completely forgot about my special day. I spent the afternoon alone watching through my bedroom window as neighbors gathered in their yards, wondering if anyone would remember. When they finally returned home after Alexander's team won, my mother rushed to the kitchen and emerged with a grocery store cake, still in its plastic container. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, but her eyes were still shining with pride from watching my brother catch the winning touchdown. School became my refuge, particularly art class with Mr. Thompson, who was the first adult to recognize that I had genuine talent. When I won the statewide creative writing contest in 8th grade, beating out hundreds of other students, I was so excited to share the news. I remember running into the kitchen where my parents were discussing Alexander's college application strategy. "Mom, Dad, I won the state writing contest," I announced, holding up my certificate. They both looked at me, and my father said, "That is wonderful, Maya. We are very proud." But before I could even respond, my mother turned back to Alexander and said, "Now about your Berkeley application essay, do you think you should mention the volunteer work first or the football captain position?" The pattern continued through high school. During parent-teacher conferences, when my English teacher praised my writing abilities and suggested I consider journalism school, my mother would nod and then immediately ask, "But how are her math scores?" Alexander was always excellent at mathematics at this age. At family dinners, the conversation revolved around Alexander's college experiences at UC Berkeley, his internships, his networking opportunities. When I tried to contribute stories about my own school activities or achievements, I was often interrupted, or the subject would quickly shift back to my brother's latest accomplishment. I learned to adapt by becoming fiercely independent. While my parents drove Alexander to every practice and game, I took the bus. While they helped him with college applications, I researched scholarships and filled out forms by myself. I taught myself to cook simple meals because family dinners were often scheduled around Alexander's activities. Most importantly, I developed a thick skin and learned to find validation from within rather than seeking it from others. The only person who truly saw me during those years was Mr. Thompson, who encouraged my writing and helped me understand that being overlooked did not mean I was worthless. He would often stay after school to review my stories and essays, offering constructive feedback and genuine enthusiasm for my creativity. He was the one who suggested I apply to Arizona State University for their journalism program, and he even helped me craft my scholarship application essay. Thanks to his guidance and my academic record, I received a partial scholarship that made college financially possible. When I graduated from high school in 2013, my parents attended the ceremony, but only because it was convenient. They were already planning to be in the area for another event, so they figured they might as well stop by. There were no special dinner plans, no celebration, just a quick photo, and congratulations before they started discussing Alexander's summer internship at a prestigious tech company in San Francisco. At Arizona State University, I thrived in ways I never had at home. I threw myself into my journalism and creative writing double major working part-time at a campus coffee shop called The Daily Grind to help pay for expenses my scholarship did not cover. I wrote for the student newspaper, interned at local media outlets, and built genuine friendships with people who valued my thoughts and ideas. For the first time in my life, I was not living in someone else's shadow. My parents rarely called during college, maybe once every month or two, and our conversations were always brief. They would ask about my grades, inquire about whether I was eating well, and then spend most of the call updating me about Alexander's accomplishments. He had graduated from Berkeley with a business degree and was working for a startup company, and they were convinced he was destined for greatness in the tech industry. When I graduated in 2017 with summa cum laude honors and immediately landed a position as a junior reporter at the Phoenix Journal, my parents seemed mildly pleased, but not particularly impressed. "Journalism is a tough field," my father said during one of our rare phone calls. "Are you sure you would not rather consider something more stable like accounting?" They attended my graduation ceremony, took the obligatory photo, and then spent dinner discussing Alexander's plans to move to a bigger apartment in San Francisco. Meanwhile, Alexander's life was beginning to show cracks that my parents either could not see or refused to acknowledge. He had left his startup job after only 18 months, claiming the company was not aligned with his vision. He moved to another tech company, then another each time with explanations about toxic work environments or limited growth opportunities. By 2019, he was struggling to find steady employment and had entered a relationship with Madison, a woman who seemed primarily interested in his ability to maintain an expensive lifestyle. I, on the other hand, was quietly building a solid career. I had moved into my own apartment in downtown Phoenix, a small but charming place, with brick walls and large windows that I had decorated with my own artwork and plants I had learned to care for. I was assigned increasingly important stories at the newspaper, covering everything from local politics to human interest pieces that earned positive feedback from readers. My byline became familiar to regular subscribers, and I was building a reputation as a thorough and compassionate reporter. The first sign that something had changed came in September 2021, when my mother called me on a Wednesday afternoon. This was unusual because our family phone calls typically happened on Sunday evenings, if they happened at all. "Maya, honey, how are you?" she said, and there was something different in her voice, a warmth I was not accustomed to hearing. "It feels like we have not talked in forever." We had spoken exactly 8 months earlier after Christmas, but I did not point that out. Instead, I told her about my recent promotion to senior reporter and a series I was working on about housing inequality in Phoenix. To my surprise, she seemed genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions and expressing pride in my accomplishments. Then she asked questions that caught me off guard. "Are you seeing anyone special? What is your salary like these days? Do you feel financially secure?" The conversation ended with an invitation that stunned me. "You know what, sweetie? Why do not you come home for dinner this weekend? I will make your favorite meal, and we can catch up properly. It has been too long since we had quality family time." I agreed, partially out of curiosity, and partially because some small part of me still craved my parents' approval, even after all these years. That Saturday evening, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in almost 2 years. The house looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere felt completely different. Alexander was there sitting on the living room sofa where he had once commanded attention with stories of his achievements. Now he looked deflated, staring at his phone with the expression of someone who had lost his way. He had moved back home after his latest startup failed, and Madison had left him when his financial prospects disappeared. But the most shocking change was in my parents' behavior toward me. Throughout dinner, they focused almost entirely on my life, asking detailed questions about my career, my apartment, my future plans. They praised my independence, my work ethic, my decision-making abilities. "We are so proud of how self-sufficient you have become," my mother said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You have really built something impressive for yourself." Alexander sat quietly through most of the meal, occasionally nodding when directly addressed, but contributing little to the conversation. I felt a strange mix of emotions: happiness at finally receiving the attention I had craved for so long, but also confusion about this sudden shift in dynamics. Where was this interest when I was 12 and winning writing contests? Where was this pride when I graduated college with honors? Over the following weeks, my parents began calling regularly, sometimes twice a week. They would ask about my assignments, my social life, my long-term career goals. They started showing up at my apartment unannounced, bringing flowers or takeout food from expensive restaurants. They wanted to hear about my work friends, my dating life, my financial planning. It felt surreal to suddenly be the center of their attention after spending decades on the periphery of their focus. By December 2021, the increased attention from my parents began to take a different tone. What had initially felt like long overdue recognition started to feel more like scrutiny and expectation. My father called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying a seriousness I rarely heard when he spoke to me. "Maya, I think we need to have an important conversation about your future," he said. "Your mother and I have been thinking, and we believe it might be wise for you to consider moving back home for a while." I was sitting in my apartment editing an article about local small business recovery after the pandemic, and his words made me pause. "Move back home, Dad. I am doing really well here. I love my apartment and my career is progressing nicely." But he pressed on, explaining that I could save money by living rent-free, that I was approaching my late 20s, and should be thinking more seriously about settling down and starting a family. "You cannot be a career woman forever, Maya. At some point, you need to think about finding a good husband and having children." These conversations became more frequent and more pointed. My mother would call and casually mention eligible bachelors she had met through work or social functions. "There is a lovely young man at the accounting firm Maya. He makes excellent money and comes from a good family. I think you two would hit it off wonderfully." When I explained that I was happy focusing on my career for now, she would sigh and say things like, "You are not getting any younger, sweetheart. Opportunities do not wait forever." The pressure intensified in January 2022 when my mother brought up a subject that completely blindsided me. We were having coffee at a restaurant near my office when she mentioned almost casually that Alexander was working on a new business plan and could use some financial backing. "He has learned from his previous mistakes," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "This new venture is much more solid, but he needs some startup capital. We were wondering if you might be able to help him out, just temporarily, of course." I nearly choked on my coffee. Here I was finally receiving attention and respect from my parents, only to discover that it came with expectations I had never anticipated. "Mom, I am saving money to buy my own house," I said carefully. "I have been working toward this goal for years, and I am finally close to having enough for a down payment." But she persisted, explaining that family should support family, that Alexander was going through a difficult time and needed our help to get back on his feet. When I declined to lend money I had worked so hard to save, I noticed an immediate change in my mother's demeanor. The warmth in her voice cooled noticeably, and she spent the rest of our coffee date making comments about how successful people have obligations to help those less fortunate, especially family members. "I am surprised by your attitude, Maya. I raised you to be more generous and family-oriented than this." February brought our first real argument. I had just received the wonderful news that I was being promoted to assistant editor, a position that came with significantly more responsibility and a salary increase that would finally allow me to start seriously house hunting. When I called to share this exciting development, my father's response was not what I expected. "Are you certain this is the right path for you, Maya?" he asked. "The more successful you become in your career, the more difficult it will be to find a suitable husband. Men can be intimidated by women who are too ambitious." I felt something snap inside me. "Dad, where is this coming from? For 26 years, you and Mom barely acknowledged my existence. You never came to my art shows, never celebrated my academic achievements, never showed interest in my goals or dreams. Now suddenly you are concerned about my love life and my career trajectory." There was a long pause before he responded, and when he did, his voice carried a tone I had never heard him use with me before. "That is not fair, Maya. Your mother and I have always loved you and wanted what is best for you. We may have been focused on Alexander's needs when you were younger, but that does not mean we did not care about you." But I was too frustrated to accept this revisionist history. If you always cared, why do I have exactly 3 pictures of myself in our family photo albums? Why did you miss my high school graduation play because Alexander had a football banquet the same night? The conversation ended with both of us upset, and for the first time since this newfound attention had begun, I started to question what was really motivating my parents' sudden interest in my life. The doubt grew stronger when I noticed that their suggestions about my future all seemed designed to either bring me closer to home or increase my financial obligations to the family. In March 2022, I got my answer in the most unexpected way. Alexander appeared at my apartment on a Saturday night, clearly having been drinking, and asked if he could come in to talk. I had rarely spent time alone with my brother as adults, and I was curious about what had brought him to my door in this condition. He sat on my small sofa, running his hands through his hair and looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "Maya, I need to tell you something, and you are not going to like it." He said his words slightly slurred, but his meaning clear. Our parents, they do not actually care about you any more now than they did when we were kids. I felt my stomach drop, but I needed to hear what he had to say. "They are only paying attention to you now because I screwed up so badly. They told me straight out that since I cannot be their successful child anymore, they need you to step up and be the one who takes care of them." Alexander went on to explain conversations he had overheard between our parents about their long-term financial security, about their expectations that one of their children would eventually support them in their retirement years. They said that since I turned out to be a disappointment, they are counting on you to be the responsible one. They want you to find a wealthy husband not just for your own security, but so you can help support me financially while I try to rebuild my life. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. "They are treating you like a backup plan," Alexander continued, "and the worst part is they planned this. Mom told Dad that it was probably good they did not coddle you the way they did me because now you are strong and independent enough to handle family responsibilities." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Even my childhood neglect had been designed to mold me into someone capable of supporting the family when their golden child failed to meet expectations. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with a mixture of rage and determination burning in my chest. I found them in the kitchen sharing coffee and the Sunday newspaper, looking like the picture of domestic contentment. When I walked in, my mother smiled brightly and started to offer me breakfast, but I cut her off immediately. "We need to talk about what you really want from me." I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Initially, they tried to deflect and deny what Alexander had told me, but when faced with specific details he had shared, they finally admitted the truth. "Maya, you are our daughter, and family takes care of family." My mother said, her tone becoming defensive. "Alexander is going through a difficult period, and he needs our support to get back on track. You have always been the stronger one, the more capable one. It makes sense for you to help him." My father nodded in agreement. "You have a good head on your shoulders, and you have built a solid foundation for yourself. Your brother needs guidance and financial assistance to rebuild his life. This is what families do for each other." But I was no longer the compliant, invisible child who would accept whatever scraps of attention they offered. "What about what I needed when I was growing up?" I demanded. "What about the support and encouragement I could have used when I was struggling to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life?" The argument that followed was unlike any conversation I had ever had with my parents. Years of suppressed frustration and hurt poured out as I confronted them about the ways they had failed me as a child, the opportunities for connection they had missed, the damage their favoritism had caused. "For 26 years, I was essentially invisible to you," I said, my voice rising. "I was not worth your time, your attention, or your pride. But now that your perfect son has failed, suddenly I am supposed to step up and carry the family." My mother became increasingly defensive, insisting that they had always loved me equally, that I was misremembering our family dynamics. But in her anger, she revealed more than she intended. "We raised you to be independent and self-sufficient because we knew you would need those qualities. We did not spoil you the way we did Alexander because we could see you were stronger, more capable of handling difficulties. Everything we did was intentional, designed to prepare you for adult responsibilities." The final blow came when she continued, "If Alexander could not fulfill his potential, we knew you would be able to step up and take care of the family. That is why we encouraged your independence, why we let you handle challenges on your own. We were preparing you for exactly this moment." I stood there stunned by the casual way she admitted that my entire childhood had been shaped by their contingency planning, that even their neglect had been a calculated strategy to mold me into their insurance policy. Walking out of my parents' house that day, I felt something I had never experienced before, complete emotional freedom from their approval. For the first time in my life, I was not wondering what I could do differently to earn their love, because I finally understood that their version of love was entirely conditional and self-serving. I drove home to my apartment, packed a bag, and took a week off work to process what I had learned and decide how I wanted to move forward. During that week of reflection, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. Instead of being crushed by the revelation that I had been nothing more than a backup plan, I chose to see it as liberation. My parents had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible. They had taught me that I did not need their validation to be worthy of love and respect. While they were busy creating Alexander's dependence on their approval and support, they had accidentally fostered my independence and resilience. I returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose and threw myself into my journalism career with an intensity I had never felt before. I volunteered for the most challenging assignments, worked overtime to perfect my reporting skills, and began developing sources for the kind of investigative journalism that had always interested me but seemed too risky to pursue. By June 2022, my dedication paid off when I was assigned to investigate a story about corporate environmental violations that had been covered up by local government officials. The investigation required months of research interviews with whistleblowers and careful fact-checking of technical documents. I worked 12-hour days following paper trails and building relationships with sources who could provide the evidence needed to support the story. When the article was finally published in September 2022, it exposed a pattern of corruption that led to several resignations and criminal charges. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and I was invited to appear on CNN to discuss my findings. The success of this investigation transformed my career in ways I had never imagined possible. I started receiving phone calls from editors at major publications who had read my work and were impressed by the depth and quality of my reporting. The most significant call came from the Washington Post, where an editor offered me a position as a staff investigative reporter with a salary that was more than double what I was making in Phoenix. As my career soared, I also began to heal emotionally from the wounds my family had inflicted. I started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that the neglect I had experienced was not a reflection of my worth, but rather a symptom of my parents' inability to love unconditionally. Through therapy, I learned to recognize and value the strengths I had developed as a result of my difficult childhood self-reliance empathy for others who felt invisible and the ability to find motivation from within, rather than seeking validation from others. During this period of growth, I also met Jacob, a freelance photographer who was working on a story related to my environmental investigation. Unlike the men my mother had tried to set me up with, Jacob was drawn to my ambition rather than intimidated by it. He supported my career goals, celebrated my successes, and understood that my work was not just a job, but a calling. We began dating seriously, and for the first time in my life, I experienced what healthy love looked like: supportive, encouraging, and free of conditions or hidden agendas. Meanwhile, my parents had discovered my professional success through news coverage and social media posts from my colleagues. They began a campaign to reconnect with me, sending flowers to my workplace, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to demanding, and even enlisting Alexander to reach out on their behalf. My brother called several times, alternating between expressing genuine remorse for his role in our family dynamics and pressuring me to forgive our parents because they are getting older and they miss you. I chose not to respond to any of these attempts at reconciliation. This was not about punishment or revenge. It was about protecting the peace and self-worth I had worked so hard to build. I had learned that some relationships are too toxic to repair, no matter how much history or DNA you share with the other people involved. Instead of trying to fix my relationship with my family, I focused on building new connections with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. In November 2022, I accepted the job offer from the Washington Post and began preparing for my move to Washington, D.C. Jacob decided to come with me as his freelance photography business could be based anywhere, and we found an apartment together in a vibrant neighborhood where we could both pursue our creative and professional goals. As I packed up my life in Phoenix, I felt excited about the future in a way I had never experienced before. The final confrontation with my parents came the week before I moved. They showed up at my apartment unannounced, having apparently driven all the way from Phoenix to make one last attempt to repair our relationship. I opened the door to find them standing in the hallway looking older and more frail than I remembered, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old desire to make them happy. Maya, you cannot cut your family out of your life forever. My mother said, her voice carrying a desperation I had never heard before. We know we made mistakes, but we love you and we want to be part of your success. My father nodded in agreement. We are proud of what you have accomplished and we want to support you going forward. Families should stick together, especially when times are good. But I had learned to recognize manipulation disguised as love, and their words no longer had the power to make me question my decisions. You taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, I told them calmly. You showed me that I do not need anyone else's approval to know my own worth. While you were busy creating Alexander's dependence on your validation, you accidentally taught me to find strength within myself. I continued, this is not about hatred or revenge. I do not hate you, but I also do not need you. You treated me like an insurance policy for 26 years, and now I am choosing to be my own safety net. I am grateful for the independence you forced me to develop, even if that was not your intention. The conversation lasted only a few more minutes before they realized I was not going to change my mind, and they left my apartment for the last time. The next week, Jacob and I moved to Washington, D.C., where I began the next chapter of my life surrounded by colleagues who respected my work, friends who valued my company, and a partner who loved me unconditionally. 6 months later, Jacob proposed during a weekend trip to Williamsburg, and I said yes, without hesitation. We planned a wedding that would include only people who had supported and celebrated us throughout our relationship, creating the kind of chosen family I had always dreamed of having. Today, at 28 years old, I work for one of the most prestigious newspapers in the country, covering stories that matter and making a difference in the world through my reporting. I wake up every morning next to someone who thinks I am remarkable, just as I am, and I go to sleep every night knowing that my worth is not dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. Sometimes I still feel sad about the family connections I lost, but I have learned that grief for what could have been is different from regret for what is. The greatest irony of my story is that my parents' attempt to use me as their backup plan actually set me free. In trying to make me their safety net, they taught me to fly. I discovered that the most loving thing you can do for yourself sometimes is to walk away from people who only see your value when they need something from you. True family is not about shared blood or obligation. It is about people who see you, celebrate you, and love you, not for what you can provide, but for who you are at your core. Looking back now, I understand that the invisible child I used to be was actually gathering strength for the woman I was meant to become. Every moment of neglect taught me self-reliance. Every overlooked achievement taught me to find validation within myself, and every disappointment taught me that my happiness could never depend on other people's approval. My parents thought they were preparing me to take care of them, but instead, they prepared me to take care of myself. And that perhaps is the most beautiful plot twist of all. Have you ever been the overlooked child in your family, or do you know someone who has experienced similar family dynamics? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it, and do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the complexities of family relationships. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by other people's recognition. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift is learning you are enough all by yourself. I hope you find peace in knowing your own value regardless of who else sees it.